I have Beauty, the 300 SEL 4.5 up on the lift and ready to do some testing on the air suspension system. We don't know what's wrong. It's not pumping up, and so I can't find any leaks. You got to be able to pump the system up and then try to locate leaks to begin with. But there's all kinds of places that you could be having leaks in one of these cars. You could have internal leaks in the valves, which would bleed air down, and you'd never be able to test for an external leak. So in this video, we're going to do some testing on Beauty's air suspension system. This is a 300 SEL 4.5, and it's not pumping up. It's just dead. So what is wrong? Well, I don't know yet. But we did find out that the compressor is outputting okay. You can see here it's pumping, it's producing good pressure. We did that outside while the engine was running, and then we brought it in here to lift. You know, it doesn't put out a high volume of compressed air, but it does put out pretty high pressure. So I've got the car on the lift, and I'm using ramps under each wheel, and this will allow me to lower the car down. We need to load the suspension in order to test it. We're going to use a compressor, not the engine running now, to test the system. I want to show you the compressor I'm going to be using to complete these tests. You know, that big shop compressor I have, like so many of them, only puts out 120 psi, and these air suspension systems operate at 145 to almost 190 psi. So I've got to use one of these newer portable high pressure compressors. You can see here this is 200 psi max, and I get a regulated pressure out of this one at about 160 psi. And I have to get at least 160 psi in that tank if I'm going to accurately test the rest of the system. And I'm going to take you up front now and show you what that reservoir tank looks, because that's the first thing we need to test. Right here you can see these two connection points. This is compressed air in and compressed air out. At the bottom of the tank you have a drain, and that drain will allow you to drain any condensation or moisture that's in the tank by pushing on it. So you can have leaks here at the drain. You can have leaks here at these fittings. There's also a check valve right here that could be problematic, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then right here you have a Schrader valve to put air into the tank. Now the problem is that the tank sits up there like this, and this Schrader valve is kind of pointing forward in an angle. You follow me? And you can't get a normal air chuck on it like this. It just won't go in there. So I've had to get creative and get one with a long hose at an angle like you see here, that I can reach up in there and get around and get on this Schrader valve like that to fill the tank. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to put the other wheel on. We'll lower it down onto the ramps, and then we're going to start filling this tank and see what happens. This is the main valve, and it acts like a controller, which of course it sends compressed air coming from the tank, moves it out to the different leveling valves underneath the car and into the airbags, or the air springs as they are known. And once again, we could have leaks in numerous places. But if I'm going to do this test on the tank, I need to make sure I put the leveling valve in the neutral position. That's the off position. This is the high position, which will raise the car, and this is the normal run position here. So I don't want any compressed air flowing through the main valve. So during this test, I'm going to put it right like that, right in the neutral position. All right, I've got some air in the tank, probably about 120 psi. I'm not going to do any more until I check to make sure the tank itself is not leaking. I'm going to first come up and check the check valve right there. You can see it right there. I'm going to spray some leak detector on it. Okay, look at that. Right away, we've got a leaking check valve. So we need to fix that before we continue. Now let's go under the tank and see if either the Schrader valve or that drain valve is leaking. Let me show you what I use for leak detecting. This is called Bitter Bubble. It's a solution that's used to check for gas leaks and gas pipes. It's very effective at finding leaks in an air suspension system. Now I'm going to spray that drain valve. Let that soak a little bit. Let's get underneath and see if that's leaking. Well, I don't see or hear any major leaks coming out of the drain valve. Let's see how much pressure is still in the tank. We can get a hold of that and push on it. You see, we're getting some moisture out of the tank. Now the tank's leaking down. It doesn't have any pressure in it now. So I've got to pressurize it again to check and see if we're getting any leaks out of the Schrader valve. Okay, ready to fill the tank up again. You know, I'm getting kind of old to do this, by the way, crawling around underneath these W109s, but at least I've got a pad on the floor, okay? Now, I can't even see what I'm doing under here at this point, but I have to use the Braille method to get this hose on the Schrader valve. Oh, come on, baby. You can see I've got to let that compressor catch up and pump back up to 150 to get some more air in, but I'm leaking even more air now out of this tank than I was the first time I filled it. I'm going to check the Schrader valve now and see if we can see if it's leaking by doing the bubble test. Well, checking down below, the drain valve is definitely not leaking, but that Schrader valve's got some bubbles coming out. But it looks like my biggest leak is in this check valve right here. Yeah, it's really kind of pouring out of there now. So we're going to have to work on this tank and get the leaks in the tank fixed before I can do anything else. And that's about all I can do today on this car. I've got a lot more work around here to do, including, you know, Digby. Those of you who want to make sure Digby gets fixed. Yeah, we're going to work on that today too. But we'll come back in the next episode and continue our testing, particularly on the main valve here and the leveling valves under this car.